All right, we're joined now by the Minister of Higher Education, Blade Nzimande. Dr. Nzimande, thank you very much for your time. We do appreciate it. When you first saw this video of this white student urinating on the possessions of a black student, what was your first reaction?
I just found this, Sally, well, good evening and good evening to your viewers and listeners. I just found this so offensive, deeply, deeply offensive, you know, that you can actually have such behavior coming from a student, a white student against a black student. But to be quite honest, I am not entirely surprised, Sally, because as a country, South Africa, you know, is that we had taken that our democratic breakthrough 27 years ago and our attempts to build what we call a rainbow nation, and the issue of racism has receded. In fact, this is a reflection of what is happening in broader society. You know, today, if you talk to any young black professional who is in the private sector, the second sentence will be to complain about racism in South Africa's private sector corporations, that it's rife. And what is worse is that there is no longer a struggle to act that is organized to fight against that. I'm not saying that we should leave universities alone because this is a societal matter, but it's broader than just the universities, you know. And what this calls for is that unless we confront the scourge of racism, together, of course, with the issue of economic inequalities, because there is a very close relationship between economic inequalities, white South Africans on average seeing themselves as better off than black South Africans. This also further reinforces racism. So this is to be strongly condemned. I'm very pleased that the university has at least taken immediate action to suspend the student, and that they are planning that by Friday they're going to have a disciplinary process and actually take a decision. Of course, I will be expecting a report from the university after that to then see and assess really whether actions that are being taken are enough. And also there is now, like as a result of this, you know, some other people beginning to come out complaining about racism that has been taking place at Stellenbosch and so on. I don't want to preempt what the university is going to do, but what this actually says is that we might actually need to do much more, both at Stellenbosch, but widely in the university sector.
And I do want to jump into that in just a moment. I want to dwell on this specific act. You're welcoming that they've taken action against Theuns du Toit, who has been suspended. Would you say, in your view, this is definitely a racist act? And the reason I'm asking that is that initially when Babalwa Ndwayana was asked by our reporter if there was any racial slurs aimed at him, and he said no. But at the same time, we know that he's opened crimen injuria, which of course is where racism would fall, racism charges. Some people are saying, and admittedly, I've seen this from white people, this kid was drunk, rude and stupid, but does it necessarily make it racism? What's your view?
My view is that this is a racist act. There's actually no doubt about that. How do you do that? Do such a thing on a computer and books of another student? Being drunk is actually no excuse. You know, by the way, alcohol, what sometimes does to people, it makes people to do things that ordinarily when they are not drunk, they can't do, but usually it's things that are deep in their own minds that they want to do. I don't think that we need to find any excuse for this whatsoever. None. For instance, this thing to me is actually no different from what happened in the University of the Free State some years ago, you know, where black women workers were actually asked to drink urine, you know, from white students. So this is clearly to me a racist act. There is no other way of defining it. No excuses whatsoever. Let's just confront. This is so undignified, you know. I mean, we can't then begin to be blaming, for instance. I'm not saying we're doing that.
No, I mean, I'm
blaming the victim now. Because I'm not saying you are. I'm saying people who are saying that can't just start blaming the victim, you know.
So, Minister,
this must have been a terrible experience.
Yeah, and in fact, I think that Babawa was remarkably controlled, because I think if someone had done that to my possessions, I probably would have gone berserk. But I want to ask you another question. Do you see this as a potentially isolated act within a university that is starting to transform, or do you see it within a broader context of institutionalized racism within Stellenbosch University?
Well, look, one must acknowledge, that a number of our universities have been doing quite some important work, and some of them relatively successfully. If you look especially at your former white universities, if you look at University of Johannesburg today, for instance, we really made huge strides, and some universities, Stellenbosch itself has been trying to be inclusive. I know that the current Vice-Chancellor has actually been trying his best to try and turn the image of Stellenbosch University. But the fact of the matter is that racism is still deeply embedded in some of these former white universities. There is no doubt about that. Just like, as I was saying, racism in broader South African society, racism in private companies, which goes unreported and unnoticed. I still think that in this country, we need actually to re-wage the struggle against racism now in a democratic South Africa. Because we can't say we have a democratic South Africa if you still have practices of this nature. In fact, there needs to be strong organizing in support of some of the efforts that we are trying to make as government. I've got policies on how, for instance, institutions should promote inclusiveness and fight against racial inequalities and discrimination, to fight against gender inequality, to fight against negative attitudes towards people with disabilities, and so on. But it's very clear that as a country and a society, we have to face it, that the scourge of racism is with us. Nice as it is to talk about a rainbow nation, there is yet no rainbow nation. That is a fact.
Minister, I want to, you say that you've got a lot of policies and you've wanted to try and grapple with this, but you yourself acknowledge we've seen these incidents where black female staff a few years ago were asked to drink urine, and this is not an isolated incident. We are seeing problems. One would expect at an institution of higher learning, where we're meant to be thinking intellectually, objectively, engaging with issues such as racism, one would have hoped that more progress had been made. And one of the comments I've been hearing in recent days is from older people going, but these are born frees. They were born after the death of apartheid. Why is this still happening? And you've pointed to a broader societal problem, but why are young people not examining the faults of their parents' apartheid past and turning against it?
Well, it's very clear that there are still families that are fostering these racist attitudes. That is why I'm saying this is a broader societal matter. Because there is no one inherently born racist. Look at kids when they are young, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, even 11 and 12-year-olds. But what normally happens, I've noticed this even with my own children, who grew up having white friends, but the moment they reach the latter years of high school, things start going differently. They start going their different ways, which clearly means that something is actually happening. It's standard. They have friends as young, but once they are older, then there are things. It's clear that there are families that are still actually reinforcing that. Otherwise, where do youngsters post-1994
so Minister,
get an attitude like this?
Minister, you spoke about your policies, yet we're seeing racism in institutions of higher learning, which of course is your area of control. Do you feel that you failed to transform certain institutions?
I wouldn't say we have failed narrowly as government. I think that we have a huge challenge as society. We have huge challenges as universities. I think that some of the things that we've done, to have social policies on inclusion, and the fact that some of the universities, by the way, as I have said, have gone a long way to actually overcome what they were in the past. A number of institutions have done so. I've just made an example with the University of Johannesburg, for instance. It means that something is happening, but clearly what we are doing is not yet enough. That is why I don't want to preempt what Stellenbosch is going to do, but it may as well be an opportunity for Stellenbosch and other universities to actually have an independent assessment of the nature and extent of racist and racial attitudes.
And Minister, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but we need to go to a media briefing about the former Joburg Mayor, Mpho Morani. But I think your comments where you're saying it's deeply offensive but not surprising and we need to really engage head-on with these issues is such an important message. I want to thank you for chatting to us on SAT tonight. That, of course, is our Higher Education Minister, Dr. Nzimande. Let's go.